Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. We wanted to focus on the whole issue of Islamic psychology. And this is something which I have been struggling with for a number of years now. And periodically there's some systematic breakthroughs that I encounter in really trying to understand how we orient ourselves. And we know that, for instance, there is the concept of thinking and there's the concept of feelings. Right? This is something that is very important to understand. When you look at various scholars in the past, in times in which people had more freedom to invest themselves in Islamic learning and peruse and dive into the Quran, they began to extract certain principles and insights from the Quran itself, which comes to constitute what we can call an Islamic psychology. Usul al-Fiqh has a lot to do with the thinking side of being a Muslim. And unfortunately, Usul al-Fiqh is like grammar, in the sense that it's something that most people don't want to deal with. It becomes burdensome. But Usul al-Fiqh, it takes from a lot of different sciences, but it also integrates those principles and understandings and insights from various sciences, and so that it stands as a science on its own. But one of the things that we find that's essential, especially to ijtihad, or to the ability to understand how it is that Islam adapts to changing circumstances. Or when we talk about nizam al-ifta, the structure and process and principle of giving a fatwa, or principles of giving a fatwa. We find that, understanding reality, fiqh al-waqi', is something that's extremely important. In other words, you have to be scientific in the process, in the sense that it is what it is. You have to determine what it is. And jahl, or ignorance, is concerned أن تصور الأمر على خلاف ما هو به. That's one definition for it, or ما هو عليه, or however you want to define it in that regard. That ignorance, is to understand something to the opposite of what it is, and then you don't even know that you don't understand it wrongly, right? That's another issue, right? And so that's a higher state of ignorance, so to speak, about an issue. So we have to differentiate between knowledge and properly understanding, and from there we understand that whether we're dealing with the issue of jahl, or whether we're dealing with the issue of wahm, all of those things, even though the ulama, wahm becomes like, the issue of fancy, that it's like in your imagination, you made an error about what it is. You're mistaken about how you conceive the issue. These are, technical terms, but overall, it comes back to the issue of ignorance. You know what I'm saying? It's not something that is knowledge based. And so the point here is that the deen, as far as the scholarship is concerned, it adjusts us to understanding realities as they are. Say for instance, if a woman gets raped, you need to understand what took place, in order to be able to determine what's the course of action to be followed. The Sharia, or Islam itself, demands that we give a value to every action that we perform, to see where it lands within the purview or within the scope of the Sharia with regard to right or wrong. And then there's also the issue of responsibility, culpability, reward and punishment. That's how we think about the world as far as human action is concerned. So we have to be people that are accustomed to dealing with reality as it is. And it's not always easy to get down to the core of what reality is. Right? And some things we can be certain about, and some things we may approach certainty, but still there may be some possibility for doubt. And that's in Usul al-Fiqh under the scope of Nadariyat al-Qat'i wa dhanni. That's important to understand, that we have within Islamic thinking and understanding that some things are clear cut. There's no debate for us. Some things are things that provide us certainty. And then some things, there's what we would call like an educated guess. It's probable with support. Some room for doubt, but overall, we have some confidence that it is what it is. And we find that that's the same thing with when it comes to the knowledge of the Sharia, and it comes to when we talk about the knowledge of the world. This is where Usul al-Fiqh overlaps with the scientific method. It overlaps with research of society, human behavior, all of that. Some things are predictable, some things are not. But we never should escape reality. And that's where Imam al-Balkhi, he shows us that, for instance, in Quranic teaching, we know that the issue of qadr is that part of qadr is that it's sweet and bitter. And we know that life itself has hardship and ease. So when we, sometimes, a lot of times when we start talking about positive thinking, sometimes what we do, especially in this type of society that we live in, which is very fun-based, right? That has a lot to do with the marketplace and the marketplace values. The issue of pain and pleasure, harm and benefit. But there's, pain and pleasure are used a lot of times for the marketplace. Everybody's trying to evade pain. That's the struggle. Everybody's trying to evade pain at whatever cost. That becomes the underlying, struggle of people. And so they try to evade pain, and there's just some pain that is built into life, and it's part of our growth process. And some pain that takes place, it demands from us certain responses. And you see that especially well manifested in the story of Musa and Khidr. Musa's having this dialogue with Khidr about these realities, about, the issue of suffering in the world and how we respond in all of this. Sure, we know that there's a greater wisdom, but at the end of the day, still the Sharia demands upon us either, we have something to be patient about, we have something to give shukr about, we have something to evade as far as a prohibition, or something to enact. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahmatullahi alayhi, he brings up that concept. What is our position to what takes place in the world? And so in any event, we're always obligated to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. الْأَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَالنَّهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. That's plentiful in the Quran, and so on and so forth. And so there would be no enjoining of the good if there wasn't the problematic affair of there being evil or bad in the world. Dar al-ibtila, or the abode of ordeal and tests, it demands that we take positions certain times. Everything is not just going to be neutral. Sometimes we have to take a position. And definitely we take positions, and those positions should align themselves with Iman. Sometimes we fail and we have to speak the truth even against ourselves. Even if it's bitter, so to speak, so hard to swallow. Things about ourselves, about our own monsters. And it's not just the issue of blaming out, or it's not just the issue of focus in. And that's the problem with some of the trends today that is not very Sharia based, is either everything is focused outward, what's happening in the world and what people are doing, and the other approach is me. And that's where, just focus on yourself. Focus on your own issues. And that's really, an imbalance. But in any event, the mental health side here is that there's some things which we have to accept as they are. We have to work through them. There's hardship and crisis when it comes, and built into that, a lot of times is us learning how to turn to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And learning how to turn to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala in tawbah. Learning how to turn to Allah wa ta'ala in begging Allah, crying to Allah, in understanding our station in the dunya. Asking Allah, requesting Allah, that nahnu al-fuqara, right? That we're the ones that are poor before Allah and in need. Wa huwa al-ghani, and Allah wa ta'ala is the one that is not in need. The one that possesses all, so to speak. And so these things are extremely important for our mental health. Like, some situations there's built-in fitna. It's like we have to take the test. And I think that in this age, alhamdulillah, that humanity has reached certain level of comfort on certain levels. Not everybody in the world, because a lot of people are impoverished. But we, at least in this society, there's a certain level of comfort that we have. But a lot of times, we become like spoiled children, in the sense that a spoiled child lacks discipline in certain areas. And so we lack life experience in certain areas, and it puts us to hardship. We expect certain things, we don't want to sacrifice, and so on and so forth. That's not everybody across the board, right? Because this is not meant to be a judgmental session on people. This is really talking about the type of education that we get from the time period that we live in. And the point of the example is saying that, when we look back a couple of generations, those people were built differently, because their life experiences brought out certain qualities in them, right? And so our life experiences bring out certain qualities in us. And it's not enough that our life experiences are there to shape our character and give us a insight into life. If that was the case, if that was sufficient, there would be no need for revelation. Revelation comes and corrects us, and it sets our affairs straight, right? That's kalimatul haq, so to speak. When we start talking about the issue of tawheed, yuslih lakum a'malakum wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum. The Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, in believing in Allah, Allah sets our affairs straight. We never ask how. Deen sets our affairs straight. The support of Allah sets our affairs straight. But also part of setting our affairs straight is that we need the maghfirah from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Sin, it has a tendency of making us anxious and tight and restricted. That's the whole position of hayatun danka, so to speak. That life in which your heart has been tightened for you and compressed and put under pressure. Because there's a deficiency in the dhikr of Allah. And the dhikr of Allah here is, we're not just talking about La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, the azkar in that sense. No. Actually, that lifestyle which is, cognizant of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala in spirit and mind, and it's one that's pure as much as possible. Sin has an impact. In the age that we live in, we don't talk about the effects of sin. We talk about shirk and we talk about these things, but we don't talk about the damage. We don't talk about the damage that sin does on our lives. And there's a direct, at least in Islamic psychology, there's a direct correlation between mental health and sin. That doesn't mean that there's no other issues that are going on, because there's certain mental issues, that have to do with physiological conditions and hereditary situations. And they have to do with illness. But here we're talking about spiritual well-being, that you can't correct that. Let me talk like this. You can't correct that joint by smoking weed or by going to the doctor and getting a prescription. That's all numbing yourself up. That's all self-medicating. You can't escape the hukm of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. That's the reality that we have to tell ourselves. Like, we can't escape turning to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And so the issue of, that mental balance is about learning how to think about things in their proper place. And it's also about accepting that built into life is hardship and problems. And then the issue is on our part, what is our responsibility? What is our responsibility? Iman increases and it decreases. We usually talk about this in the realm of Aqidah, but in the impact in Islamic psychology, that iman is increasing because of our proximity to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, the tawassul that we have by our deeds or by our du'a, right? By our du'a. That's all agreed upon stuff. Right? Tawassul is important. The issue of tawassul where there's disagreement is when you start talking about, asking Allah by way of the dead, so to speak. And I don't want to get into all of that stuff. But we're talking about how do we gain proximity to Allah. And we gain proximity to Allah through our deeds and to our calling out to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Right? And in that regard, that's the benefit of the sunnah. The sunnah, it gives us a pattern of how to reach to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. A known course. But by way of our deeds, when we start talking about believing with certainty that which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala legislated us to believe in, and when we act upon that which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala obligated or encourages us to, and we make an attempt to stay away from that which is problematic, and definitely that which is haram, our iman increases. And along with our iman increasing, our well-being increases. We always have to put gas in the vehicle, so to speak. And it's the same thing with this issue that, our mental state, it always has to be taken care of. Just like you have to feed your body, you have to feed your soul. And iman, it decreases, and it has an impact on our psychology, even on our perception. People, anybody, look at your own life. Don't take what I'm saying, but look at your own life. When you sin, when you're deficient in your relationship with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, measure that. And I'm not asking you to go and be deficient. You know what I'm saying? But I'm telling you that take from your experiences if you find yourself, and see the difference between when you make tawbah, how you feel released. There's the issue of qabd and bust in that regard. There's the issue of being under pressure, right? And then there's the issue of feeling restraint and constraint, and then being released. And a lot of times we don't realize that sin has that impact. It will stress us out. Just like stress in general. Stress puts us like that. And so that's the situation that, in Islamic psychology, there's a twofold process regarding our thinking and our emotions. And then there's the issue of maintaining our iman. Maintaining our iman and being conscious of how it is that our iman contributes to our well-being. That doesn't mean that people that have issues in mental health is a deficit of iman all the time. This is not that type of, it's not to judge people on that level, because mental health overall is more complicated than that. But, there is an aspect to it which involves this. It involves the issue of iman and where we're at with iman and so on and so forth. And sometimes what happens is that when these hardships hit us, we lose the opportunity. For one reason or another, is not to blame people, but we lose the opportunity in navigating the lesson that we're supposed to learn in these situations. And I don't like telling people that they're being tested, and when they're going through hardship, it's not a very good way to approach things. But for us to remember the power of saying inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun, that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, commanded us, if we're struck with a musibah, if we're struck with a calamity or an ordeal, a lot of times we have taken the statement inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun, from Allah we come and to Allah we return, to just pertain to somebody that, we say that when a person has died. But that's not the Quranic imperative. The Quranic imperative, when it comes to the issue of Islamic psychology, it gives us an insight that, yes, life in this dunya is not perfect, right? That's the conception of Jannah, that is free, is removed from deficits, is removed from pain, is removed from all those, situations, and there's endless felicity, level upon level, endless felicity, depth upon depth. You can't even grasp it with the mind. But this world is a world of opposites. There's pleasure and pain, there's issues, there's hardship, ease. And so you find that the Quran gives us that approach to situations. The Quran itself becomes that means, that tool by which we understand and we comprehend reality. Right? And so, with these issues, we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And the thing about it is that, again, if we're not, and it's like a person that's sick. When you start to eat, where is your taste buds? With regard to tasting that food, if you've been sick in a way which distorts your taste buds, your taste buds don't allow you to appreciate the reality of that food that you're eating. And that's the same thing when we're sick with sins. That's the same thing when we're sick with deficits in Iman. We can't appreciate the reality of the Quran. We can't appreciate the reality of these types of things if we're sick. And the problem that we have nowadays, and we have to frame this properly, is that, we have to admit that things are not well. They're not well. And a lot of times the situations that we're living through are really situations of deep breakdown. But alhamdulillah, there's people are maintaining, but they're not close to the fitrah of the human being. They're not close to the nature or the pattern upon which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala created us. There's a lifestyle, وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ لِبَاسًا وَجَعَلْنَا النَّهَارَ مَعَاشًا. You think about that, right? That you think about how people are working 24 hours a night, a 24-hour shift, so to speak. And, some people, you think about what goes on in the night, and it's not a lifestyle in which people, they're putting so much into just eating and sleeping and drinking and shelter and fire, utilities and all that type of stuff. And that, even like the basic ease of getting rest in the night is not there for people. Some people are working night shifts. Some people are so full of anxiety over their bills that they're not at ease. And then even when they go out in the morning to go get their rizq, you find that there's deficiencies, they're not making enough per hour to be able to sustain themselves. And so that throws off people's courses of action. That throws off people's, ability to focus on higher realities, like devote time to Allah. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't make an effort, but we also have to be compassionate and know where people are at, where their psychology is at in that regard. And we also have to be able, لازم أن نبين للناس يعني فوائد الإيمان, the الفوائد, we have to clarify for the people, for ourselves even, what are the benefits of Iman? What are the benefits of Iman as far as an overall lifestyle? And these are some of the things that are benefits, that trying to sustain our Iman, it helps us to go through hardship. It helps us to go through what it is that we're going through. And unfortunately, the non-believers, sometimes they poke fun at the believers and they say, you're not strong enough in life. That's why you count on religion. That's not an uncommon reality. But what we gain from that is that there are some things that you have to have strength in. There's some things which may not necessarily be issues of Iman. It may be that you have fallen into superstition. So we can even take lessons from the non-believers in that regard, but they're not our teachers with regard to the meaning of life. We can learn from them, because we can learn to take lessons from everything in the world, so to speak. But we root ourselves in Iman. We can learn from other people's feelings, because the Quran tells us, pay attention to the people, who have gone and come in the past, the people who have believed and unbelieved, right? And there's a shared human experience where we can learn from. And then the Quran is telling us like, look, be careful. Be careful that, people think that for a time they're doing well and then they start to collapse. And so, we see that, okay, fine, there's some things like taking care of yourself, taking care of yourself and being disciplined, that's fine. People, unbelievers throughout the world, they have that, in their toolbox, so to speak. But then when we look at how people deal with hardship, when hardship comes, when their money goes, when a death comes, when real deep hardships of life come, people don't know how to function. They commit suicide, this, that. And so these are lessons that we have to look at. We have to look at how it is that people navigate. And I'm not claiming to have a detailed, perfect, insight into all of this, but this is an outline or framework of saying that, just because we're going through crap in life, it doesn't mean that it's always bad. The ayah of the Quran, "Asan takrah shay wa huwa khayrun lakum." The reality that comes to mind is that, it could be the case that you dislike something which in reality is good for you because of what you perceive to be good and bad. And this is heavily debated in Usul Fiqh. The issue of the mind or reason being able to determine what's good and bad, with a nice portion of the ulama saying, yes, you can determine some degree of good by way of reason. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, the Maturidis, they have that concept. The Asharis were the ones that said that no good really can be determined by intellect. Everything is by way of revelation alone. But we, remember that the human being is created by Allah wa ta'ala. So we get the manual, we get the manual to how to function, and at the same time, built into us is a program that, synchronizes with the manual, so to speak. We're not the ones that are the people that are in control or the creators. And so, that's the thing. Allah wa ta'ala is the sole controller in that regard. So our mind has the ability to help us. But it has, again, we have to take care of ourselves. And I want to close with this. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to be in tune with our fitrah, our nature, in order for us to be able to tap in. And that's a process. And part of that process, I don't think the scholars disagree across the board. Part of that process is working on the realm of our belief and how we navigate in our desire. Because these are the two areas where there's problems that emerge across the board. And shubuhat wa shahwat, where people begin to have doubts or bad ideas. I would even add into that, and then the other issue is where people's desires overcome them, and so that takes us away from our original nature, and that's a lot of times what creates these imbalances. Aqidah is more than just tawheed. The same thing, the same thing with Iman, is more than just Tawheed. Aqidah encompasses some aspects of how we think about things as well. How we think about the world, and so the meaning of life, we have to look at the meaning of life, and we have to look at what it is that, especially expectations. Some of us, we want Jannah out of the dunya. And mashallah, we try to build it for ourselves. We really do. Some of us have reached a point where we really try to build it for ourselves. We go and everything is money. Everything is wealth. And we try to hide in that reality. You know what I'm saying? And some of us, we live a pretty well-balanced life in that regard. But, it's like that's not the... If your whole thing is just that, fine, if you go the money route, then where are you from sadaqah and zakah? If you go the money route, then where are you from building for other people? Where are you from, aiding? It's not just also an issue that you pay people off. That's another thing, is that people think because they have money, they write their check for zakah they gave a sadaqah here, and then they like paid off their deen. You know, sometimes the sadaqah is in you assisting other people to understand how to benefit themselves, not in you giving them money and paying them off and thinking that's it. In other words, there's the whole issue of perfecting, you know, the constant perfection of our character and achieving the greatest possible existence for ourselves, you know, and being a human being. That's what I mean. And being a human being and being able to model the qualities of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, the Sahaba were, subhanAllah, you know, you find that some of them were the wealthiest people in the dunya, and then they gave up their wealth for the deen. You know, and so it's like they achieved the dunya, and then they showed that they can achieve it, they can do it, and they gave it up for the deen, and they devoted themselves to Islam in that way. And everything became, you know, love of Allah, love of the Messenger, love of the Ummah. That was their life. You know, and so that's the thing. I think a lot of times the people that become wealthy in the Ummah in today's time, they're following the wealthy people of the dunya. You know, they're not always following the wealthy people of the first generation and how they dealt with things. If that was the case, the condition of the Muslims will be completely different. You know, we have a need for the wealthy to, you know, increase economic opportunities to alleviate people's suffering. You know, there becomes goodness to be manifested at other levels. So I don't want to go too deep into that, but other than to say that Aqidah, you know, is also about how we reflect upon the world. Does it reflect Islamic values? You know, it doesn't reflect Islamic values. That's the issue. You know, does it reflect those values which will elevate and uplift life? You know, it's not just something that I believe and then that's it in my mind, but it's like, you know, it's a way of thinking which transforms our world. Tawheed and Iman is more fundamental, you know what I'm saying, in that regard. But our Aqidah also is a reflection on how we're thinking and navigating in the world. How well do we imbibe the Quran, and how well are we applying its lessons? You know what I'm saying? That's why I said that's a reflective element. There's a reflective element to that. You know, but I want to leave off on that note, you know, that, you know, our thinking and our emotions, we're going to have a lot of ups and downs. We're going to lose some. We're going to even be weak in Iman. We're going to be holding on by a hair. We're going to find ourselves deficient completely. Some of us may even leave the deen, right, in practice. And we hold on to 1 inch of belief in the Iman. You know, and how it would look from the outside would be that we're kafir. You know, but deep down inside, we're just holding on, you know. And so it's all possible to turn around back. That's why we said that, you know, sometimes we have to look at what's going on. A lot of times that happens because of where we're at emotionally and where we're at in our thinking. And I'm sorry to say, but, you know, sometimes it's, you know, it's also some of us lack love. Some of us don't have love in our lives. You know what I'm saying? And that really has an impact on us. So that's why, you know, that was the purpose of this reflection, to say that, you know, how do we maintain, you know, our Islamic psychology? How do we maintain our mental health? A lot of times is we have to go back to how we think about things. Islamic sciences should be studied, not to prove a point, but to help us think, to get the tools of thinking. That's why Talib Ilm is very fundamental to our growth and our survival as Muslims. Without it, you know, I really doubt Islam will remain in certain communities. And it's not just, you know, the ideas and thinking and so on and so forth, but it's also the ideas of also, you know, that come from the Quran about life. Built into life, people, is hardship. But along with that hardship is ease. Right. And so that, you know, that should be enough to keep us real. Like, you know, it's part of life. Alhamdulillah. Right. And that's why we say Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. You know, Alhamdulillah in every situation, whatever it may be. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.